Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book, and today I'm going to be talking about Alan Moore's Saga of the Swamp Thing, Book 1. This volume contains, I think here it is, issues 20 through 27 of Alan Moore's, I guess you could say iconic. I've heard it is iconic. I have not read the whole thing yet, so I can't speak from experience quite at this moment. But of Alan Moore's well-regarded, well-known run of the Swamp Thing that he did in 1983 to 1987. So over the course of about 4 years, and I forget exactly how many issues it was. It was maybe about 40 or 50 issues of this run in reinventing this character. So a little bit of background on my history with reading the works of Alan Moore. Prior to reading this first volume of Swamp Thing, I have read, I think, about 5 of Alan Moore's works. Watchmen, V for Vendetta, Batman the Killing Joke, From Hell, and Lost Girls. So I've read those 5 before. I know my absolute favorites of those 5 to be Watchmen and From Hell. And I think, honestly, even though I love Batman, The Killing Joke, I think, had to be my least favorite out of those 5. Watchmen, I first read over 10 years ago, a couple of years after the movie came out. And I hadn't seen the movie before, so my first experience with the story was with the comic. And it was, I think, extremely formative to me, not only in my the way I looked at the world, but then also in the way that I think, in a way that influenced my writing, and then certainly what the kinds of stories that I was interested in reading. I think that was my first exposure as a kid to just what was possible in superhero stories, and I saw that first through Watchmen. I know a lot of Watchmen is a lot of people's entry into the works of Moore, but chronologically in his career, I think it was his run with Marvel Man, but now I think the name is Miracle Man, the name of that character. That was, Alan Moore. Not necessarily that it's like a stereotype of his work or kind of a trope of his work. His trope is to subvert the tropes, to kind of wipe the slate clean if he's working with pre-existing characters, pre-existing comic book characters in particular. It was just, even as a not even a teenager yet, it was so refreshing for me to read Watchmen and to see real comic book characters and all the ambiguities that story had for all of its focal points and all of its focus characters, kind of that core cast of 6. It was so great to experience. I'm not a huge fan of the Zack Snyder film adaptation. I've seen all 3 of the main versions of it, and I do own the director's cut on Blu-ray, but it's not a movie I revisit often. But Watchmen, the comic, is a comic that I have read many, 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 many times. Then V for Vendetta was the second thing I read by Alan Moore, and I've read it a couple of times, but it's been many years since I have revisited it. So I think I'm a little overdue to reread Watchmen. I know I'm certainly overdue to reread V for Vendetta. The same can also be said for From Hell. I read From Hell and Lost Girls about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And From Hell, it's almost like it did what Watchmen did. And I could see where one could argue that Watchmen or From Hell is better than Watchmen. I think there's certainly an argument to be made there. But it's been long enough to where knowing the intricacies of what I loved about that story are starting to fade from my memory a bit. So even though I don't own From Hell, that is certainly one that sometime this year, perhaps, I hope to reread and revisit, because it is quite a great story. Not just the thriller, serial killer, almost horror-esque journey through the mind of Alan Moore's interpretation of who Jack the Ripper was, but it's also a great and fascinating depiction of the nature of evil, of the Victorian era, the end of the Victorian era, and then the beginning of the modern world, the modern global world. I remember, and it just came to me now, one of the things that it always haunts me and stays with me really with any Alan Moore work is when he can really dig into a universal concept in such a almost frightening way. And I remember when the moment happened for me with From Hell, where where the work kind of fully consumed me, and I was both terrified by it, but I loved what I was reading because I was so invested in it. There's a chapter in From Hell, this isn't really a spoiler, where Moore, and I forget the artist's name, the illustrator's name, the penciler's name behind From Hell, but it's a depiction of the conception of Adolf Hitler's conception. It's a horrifying scene, and you don't start to realize what happens until the names of the characters are starting to get mentioned. And then I think it's Hitler's mother, kind of as the conception happens, sees like a terrifying vision of the future, and that has a lot to do with kind of, terrifying aspects of, again, the nature of evil, but also the nature of potential deities at work in the world as well. And that's something that Alan Moore never shies away from, and he really loves to explore kind of the things that make us very squeamish. Likewise, Lost Girls, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that. I think if for those who at least know of that work, I think its reputation precedes it. Yeah, Alan Moore is he's never afraid to push the envelope of an audience's or a reader's comfort level. And I think you can do that more in a visual medium like comics, because it isn't just the words you are reading, there's also the visual aspect there as well. And the way you can structure the flow of that visual he's a master. And it's not just him, it is the artists that he works with as well. And I've never seen a case yet, really, where Alan Moore, where the vision that Alan Moore had is clear and it's decent on paper, but then the artistry side of it, the visual aspect of it, hasn't been able to match it, or where they haven't been able to marry well. I haven't seen that done poorly yet, so that's good. Anyways, let's get back to what this video is all about. Book 1 of Swamp Thing. Again, this constitutes issues 20 through 27 of, I think it's the second volume of the run of Swamp Thing. And volume 20, I was a little bit apprehensive maybe to start with volume 20, because when Moore entered Swamp Thing, the first issue that he wrote, issue 20, was actually tying up, it's called Loose Ends. It's tying up the loose ends of the previous storyline. So you're just kind of thrust into the middle of the storyline. I don't really know what's going on, but it's not too difficult to follow the gist of it. And volume 20 is important to read because it leads right into volume 21, which revivifies the character of Swamp Thing. My preconceived notions, and I think one of the reasons why I maybe avoided reading Swamp Thing for a while is, I had an idea of it in my head. I had an idea that it would just be another like it's a monster comic or it's just a like light horror comic. But no, it's Alan Moore. So you start at the surface level, but you dive much deeper into the twisted natures of the characters, the kind of not necessarily esoteric ideas that they're dealing with, that they're thinking about. I mean, already within these first 8 issues of Swamp Thing, we're constantly getting ideas of identity and purpose, humanity. Can things that are not human, or can things that aren't human have humanity? I mean, that's whether it be Philip K. Dick or just about any other author out there that explores the nature of what it truly means to be human. I dig that. So I loved it with this, and I don't want to give away a kind of a little twist or a reveal of sorts that happens in issue 21. I'll save that. But anyway, so I knew nothing, not only about this run of Swamp Thing, but as with Swamp Thing as a character. My comics in general for me have been a little, I've never fully been into comics, whether it be, the more mainstream Marvel, DC titles, and this was a DC title, or Image Comics, what used to be Vertigo, was never, there would be runs. I think I read a little bit of Garth Ennis's Preacher, Neil Gaiman's Sandman. I read a little bit of that. But the author that I've kept coming back to a little bit at a time over the years is Alan Moore. Even characters like, I love Batman. I've read quite a few of those, of the great arcs of the Batman comics, but never on a consistent basis. And so with Swamp Thing being a DC character, and I think considering the fact too that as part of James Gunn's DCU, that they're making a feature film adaptation of Swamp Thing that is said to be inspired by Alan Moore's run. So that's kind of exciting to kind of get an idea for what could be possible in a film adaptation. And I think it's going to be directed by James Mangold, who has a mostly solid, I think, directorial track record for films. So Swamp Thing, I'll give a little bit of the general character's background. I think it's not super clear, or it's not, or maybe I forgot it by now, but a scientist named Alec Holland, who, while he's in the Louisiana bayou, dies, and this almost sentient moss that's around him kind of forms into this creature with the apparent consciousness of Alec Holland, and that creature, or the monster, whatever you want to call it, is Swamp Thing. Already, it was interesting within this book to see the character of the Floronic Man. I don't know how prevalent the Floronic Man is in things potentially outside of Swamp Thing, or if he's like a Swamp Thing, or if he's a frequent villain in Swamp Thing. I don't know. But Floronic Man, aka Jason Woodrue, fascinating because he's almost like the reader. He wants to know more about Alec Holland, about Swamp Thing. He wants to really kind of sink his teeth into it. And there's a lot of fascinating environmental themes at work here. Almost, not that Alan Moore is criticizing like rampant environmental activism, but this is the first time that I've seen the idea of plants growing almost scare the bejesus out of me. Where, you think of plants growing and you think, it's good for the environment, it's good for people. But to take something that people would consider good, and to put a horror twist on it. That, for example, what if so many plants grew in an area that if you lit a match or an open flame, the whole thing would blow up, would go up in flames. That's horrifying. When you create such a huge oxygen filled environment, you make the whole world almost a powder keg. And but again, it's hard to say stuff without spoilers. I'll say what I'm intrigued by. I'm still intrigued by the character of Swamp Thing, the heroism that Swamp Thing has within him, but still the struggles that are there. It almost seems like he has moved past some of those initial inner conflicts and struggles, but I'm sure, this run would not be acclaimed if all of those inner turmoils stopped at issue 27. Likewise, Abigail Cable, another fascinating character. I believe it's mentioned at some point in here that she has paranoid schizophrenia or something like that. And her husband, Matt Cable, there's something going on with him. And I don't think that these weren't Alan Moore's creations, if I'm correct in that. But there's background to these characters that either was still mysterious to readers as this came out, or it was well known about what their background was, the strange aspects of their characters. I'll just say that. I don't know, but I'm sure things ought to become more clearer as I move along. Likewise, Erdogan, the demon that shows up kind of late in this book. It was almost funny, in a very black comedy way. This demon who also has a human form and is hunting this Monkey King. It was almost a little. It was like dark humor, where he's this demon that thinks he has a grasp on the English language, but what he just says a lot of like rhyming phrases and almost just constant limericks. So he can just speak in that manner. So it's humorous how kind of almost stilted his English and his languages. An instance of humor. There is the final 2 volumes of this definitely had more humor than the beginning of it. And again, the art style is very interesting as well. At first, when I had read it, I feared it was a little muddled. I'll kind of show some of it here, where it's almost like the colors and the way that characters are formed, they kind of almost it's not that characters in the foreground fade into the background, but there's a lot of shadow. There's a lot of use of shadow. That's what I mean to say. But it makes the colors pop quite well in this. Yeah, so I think that's about all I have to say about book 1 of the Swamp Thing right now. And that was just a little extra rundown of my history with Alan Moore. And I'm sure I'll have more to say about the comic itself as the storyline progresses through book 2, book 3, etc. But this is another great work by Alan Moore. I would say it's on track to be up there with Watchmen and From Hell. But I'm only about a 1/6 of the way through the complete story. It's about a 6-volume run. But I'm very excited to see where this goes. So, if you have read Alan Moore's Saga of the Swamp Thing, let me know what you think, and I will see you guys next time.